basically, I did wonder about how I could introduce John, because he's not only a founder member, he's been the editor, the secretary of the GFS. Okay. He has been always there supporting the committee, supporting our members through thick and thin. And that, I think, is really something to commend, because it's easy to walk away when things are getting tough or challenging. But John's always been there, has always done the best he can for our society. And I just want to say, I think there's no one else who we could have asked to start our series of interviews more worthy than John Walley. Okay. Prior to this meeting, I've asked people to send in questions, and there's about 13, 14 questions which I've received. Okay, and that covers a whole host of things about ukuleles, the GFS, George Formby, and I'm not going to waste any more time procrastinating, because I know we are limited. So I'm going to kick off and like to say welcome to John. Let's give him a round of applause. Okay, thank you. I am applauding. That's a very silent round of applause, but well done. Thank you, everyone. It's important for this meeting. If you keep muted, we'll get through the questions quicker, and hopefully there may be some time at the end of the session to open it up to the floor. Okay, so one of the first questions, John, which I've been asked to ask you is, how did your George Formby story begin? What got you into the society? What fascinated you about George?
Well,
okay, sorry, mate.
When I was at school, I was quite interested in acting, and I'd played in 3 school plays, and I was interested in the theatre. And I remember coming home one night after a rehearsal, and my mum and dad said, "We're going to the Theatre Royal in Hanley, which is our local theatre, to see a play. Do you want to come with us?" And I said, "Of course I do." So we went over there, and this was the following week, and it was George Formby. What he got to do with acting, I don't know, but I'd heard of George Formby, of course, from the Film Fun magazine. But we went over, and it was a play called Too Young to Marry. And I watched this play, and it's very funny, especially a scene where George gets drunk. In spite of what some of his contemporaries say, George was a very good actor. He played himself, yes, but he was also a good actor. And halfway through this play, he went to a cupboard, I remember, and pulled out this thing that I thought was a banjo, which of course wasn't. It was a ukulele banjo. And he sang this song, "If you don't want the goods, don't maul them." And the thing that struck me was the whole audience stood up at the end of the song, cheering and clapping, and the play couldn't go on. And the theatre manager had to come on and quieten the audience down and say, "We've got to get on with the play, I'm sorry. Perhaps Mr. Formby will sing more at the end." He didn't, but that's the effect it had on me. And like, a teenager, something like that had a tremendous effect on me. And from that moment, my Formby sort of life began, although I had heard of him some years before. I'd be 15, 16, something like that.
Okay. Because it was, you also, you met the Beatles, didn't you, at the Imperial, one of the first meetings there.
Yes, I was locked in a lift with them. I'd like to say for half an hour, but it was no more than 2 minutes.
Excuse me. So moving on.
Do you want to hear that story, or shall we?
Why not? Yeah, please.
Very quickly, Billy Hartley and myself used to stay at the Imperial Hotel, and this was 1963. And as it is now, there's the entrance hall and the revolving doors, and then there's the lift to the right of reception. And we walked in there to go to bed after the convention, and suddenly this throng of girls came behind us, and the lifts closed, and we were in the lift with these scruffy chaps, and we could hear these girls screaming, and suddenly halfway up the lift stopped and the lights went out, and when it started again to get to our floor where we were staying, Billy Hartley said, "I think that's the Beatles." And I couldn't care less. I'd never heard of the bloody Beatles, But they were appearing at the ABC Theatre, Blackpool. And 12 months later, of course, they went to America, and the rest is history. But that's my claim to fame, locked in a lift with the Beatles.
Wow. It's interesting, John, you mentioned Bill Hartley, because yesterday I had an email from his long lost grandson who's been given a banjo uke. Yeah, been given a banjo uke. And that obviously seen the adverts for the meetings and obviously the Zoom event last night, which was incredible, Suzanne. And basically what happened was he wants to learn the ukulele. And I mentioned that his granddad was in the Formby Society, mentioned his name. I recognise the name. And I spoke to Peter, who's got a clip of him playing at, I think, the Imperial, many years ago.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting.
His favourite song was "Down the Coal Hole."
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm going to have a conversation with him next weekend to date him on the things I found out about his granddad. Yeah.
He's a legend, was Billy Hartley. We used to call him Bananas.
Bananas.
Because he played the ukulele and his hand looked like a bunch of bananas going up and down like that.
Wow. So I am amazed. It's such a small world.
Yeah.
Brought together by George Formby.
The Formby story keeps going and going and going.
Next question, John. Over 60 years ago, you've been a member of the GFS. What has been your highlights?
Do you know, I thought this question would come up, and therefore I've cheated. I said, what question could possibly come up? And I've cheated. It sounds a bit pompous, but I've scribbled some of the events, the highlights down. The Palace Theatre, Manchester, we went there, a group of us, with Roy Hood for a television programme called Halls of Fame. I'm just going to read these in note form. The Warrington Exhibition, do you remember that? 1991. That was tremendous. George's mother, I remember meeting her in 1963. We went to fetch her. Bill Logan rang and said, I've had communication from I think it was Louisa Formby, and they'd like to come to a convention, and would you go and meet them? I said, no, not really. He said, well, I'll send my chauffeur with you. So when we got to Blackpool on the Sunday, I was driven in Bill Logan's Rolls Royce to Eliza Formby's house in Warrington, and we brought her to the meeting. That was a tremendous thrill and a highlight. She was 83 then, and who can forget the Albert Hall, a very recent event, probably the most momentous event in the Society's history. But there are lots and lots of events, but I put them under two headings, events and people. It's the people that I remember more than the events. The events are very exciting, very important, all the TV documentaries, Dan Wiles and etc. But I remember all the people. You mentioned one, Billy Hartley, but I met people like Arthur Askey and Eddie Waring and George Harrison, the Beatle, and Eddie Latter. He was a tremendous, Billy Hugh Scott, of course. And it was amazing. And highlights, very difficult to pick them out because there were so many. What I've done very quickly a moment ago is to read a few out that have stuck in my memory and that I've written down. But it's amazing, amazing.
You mentioned about George Harrison. Can you tell me the story about that? Because I'm sorry, I'm being quite selfish now.
Well, his parents had always been fans of George Formby, and George Harrison, of course, was a multi-instrumentalist, guitar, ukulele, etc. And he came to one of the meetings and sang him a little snapshot album. He was with his wife and his son, Danya, I think his son was. He had no bodyguards or anything. Lovely, lovely man, very apologetic for what he was going to do. And he came on the stage and he sang this song. It was very good indeed. And it's a real highlight. I think we've got him doing it on video somewhere.
All right.
Yeah.
Wow. So we talked about some of the people you met through the years in the Society, John. What was the overriding memory of the very first meeting at Blackpool in 1961?
Oh, my goodness. The memory, it would be memories rather than memory. Well, I tell you what I'll do for those of you who watch. Now we go through the hotel. We turn left to the Lancaster Suite, is it, or something?
Yes, yeah.
In the early days, we used to go into the hotel foyer and either use the lift or the stairs and go up to the second floor where the Warbeck and Egerton rooms were. Our meetings were held there. We had 2 rooms. And imagine opening that door of one of the rooms, the Warbeck room, and on the left was a row of trestle tables on which were displayed 5 of George's ukes, the Abbot, couple of little baby Gibsons, big Gibson, 2 ukuleles, and on another table were memorabilia such as his walking sticks, his suitcase, his jockey colours, and on another one, a long table covered in cellophane to protect them, were many, many photographs, 10 by 8 black and white photographs of various aspects of George's career. And when I first went to the meeting, that was tremendous. I was about 17, 18, and I'd been a fan of George since I saw him at the theatre. But honestly, for me, a young, impressionable lad, to see all that was tremendous. George's ukes and the displays, and the first film we ever watched was Off the Dole, which is not considered one of his best films, but I think the last 10 minutes where George is in evening dress singing those couple of songs is absolutely brilliant. And I remember Billy Scott and Jimmy Clitheroe, and it was amazing, all these people. Frank Formby came on the Sunday with his wife and his son, and he wouldn't sing a song for us at all until Frank Formby, God bless him, was always interested in money, especially other people's. And Bill Logan actually paid him a £5, which was a lot of money in those days, to sing a song. And he sang, it's another fella's job by now. Harry Scott came too that first weekend, and it was his birthday. So we all sang happy birthday to Harry Scott. Amazing. A wonderful, because there were lots of people there, not hundreds as there are now, but all the people were interested in George Formby and the ukulele. I know they are now, but in those days, everything was new. We hadn't seen a Formby film for 15, 20 years, you know. Now, really? I know, but now, of course, we see them every convention, and I still watch them because I think they're terrific. But everything was new. There wasn't a Ludwig in sight. There wasn't an Abbott in sight. There wasn't a Gibson in sight. They were all Dallas models mainly, and a collection of hybrid ukuleles. But it was amazing, absolutely. The first meeting, it's amazing how I can remember 60 years ago, but in your life, certain events stick in your memory, and that one does for me.
It's interesting you said about the ukuleles, John, because Lionel Owen, as you know, I think he joined the second meeting at Blackpool. He always said that there wasn't anyone with Abbotts or Gibsons or Ludwigs. It was a Dallas, if you're lucky.
No, Pat Howson had withdrawn the Ludwig from the sale. That irked Bill Logan, the first president. He went up to that sale and wanted the Ludwig more than anything. He got hold of the Abbott. That was the only Abbott at the meeting, but it was damaged. And he had to send it to Clifford Essex in London to have a peg repaired. So that was the only Abbott, but there were no Gibsons or Ludwigs. However, that's a shame.
Was there, just dropping back onto Bill Logan, John, was there some sort of controversy about the auction where Bill purchased as many ukes as he could? Is that
Bill Logan didn't know anything about George's ukes, but a man named George Wilson, who really founded the society by writing a letter inviting people who liked George to make themselves known, he did. He knew that George played an Abbott and a Gibson and a Ludwig. And when at the sale, Bill Logan had the money and George Wilson had the knowledge of the ukes. So that's why Bill Logan got all those Gibsons and the Abbott, etc. But he was under the impression that he paid, I think, £227, I think was, for the lot. The
The
Abbott
lot?
was only 27 quid. No, 227 quid for the lot. But the Abbott sold for £27. So remember that. And it was damaged. But the controversy was that we all thought, George Wilson especially, that the society would pay Bill Logan back when it had the funds and the instruments would belong to the society. But of course, that never happened. They were paid for by Bill Logan's hard-earned money, so fair enough.
Yeah, it surprised me earlier when you said you went in Bill Logan's Rolls Royce, chauffeur-driven.
Yeah.
To George's mother. I never
Yeah.
realised. Never realised that. I presume that's.
We went into her room. It was only a terraced house with her daughter. And over the mantelpiece, there's a fireplace, you know, and over the mantelpiece on the left, yes, the left, was an oval picture, portrait of George Jr. in his early 20s. And over the other side was another oval matching frame of George Sr., her husband. And it looked lovely, you know. But she was quite deaf and a bit blind, but we brought her and we showed No Limit in that, because that was her favourite film. And she sat there, I can see her now in the front row, saying, "Oh, Georgie, Georgie, Georgie." She always called him Georgie, you know. And she loved that. She loved that film. And it's a lovely memory for me, having ridden with her in a Rolls Royce, bringing her to Blackpool and taking her back home.
Wow,
A very quiet old lady, but she had her head screwed on.
You know, if we mentioned Bill Logan, our next question, which was sent in by a member, was: can you briefly describe what's your memories of Bill Logan? Because he was the first president, wasn't he? He was a character, was he?
He was a businessman, a very nice man, but he didn't suffer fools gladly. He was to the society what Beryl was to George. In the early years, we had a lot of newspaper reporters and, you know, story grabbers who wanted to make mugs of the George Formby Society, to stereotype us, you know. Just as George is still stereotyped today, you know, northern twit, plays a banjo, sings mucky songs and all that business. So they wanted to make fun of us. But Bill Logan put his foot down. He had to be in the early years, I'm afraid, he had to be a bit of a bastard. And he controlled the society. He controlled the society, not in a nasty way, but he saw to it that we were never taken for granted. And wow. he was, as I say, to Beryl, what Beryl was to George, he was to the society. And I don't know if you can see this, but at the meeting 10 years ago, somebody said, "You've been a founder member. Why don't you write about the 50 years?" So I did.
No, but it was me.
It was Jill as well.
Mainly me.
But 1961 to 2011, and there's. You're asking about Bill Logan. There's one here, the early years, but chapter two is the presidents. The first meeting, don't know if you can see it, the first meeting and the first vellum. And then there's a section, chapter 3, I beg your pardon, the presidents, with all 8 presidents. We've only had 8 presidents in 60 years, which isn't bad going.
Wow.
But okay. Bill Logan was president, as you say, for 15 years, the first 15 years. And he kept the society going, especially in the difficult years when we hadn't any money. He used to pay the hotel bill out of his own pocket and the room hire out of his own pocket. And he used to pay a projectionist named Jimmy Proven to come from Glasgow with his equipment to show us the films, because there was no such thing as DVDs, etc. We showed them on 16mm reels. And they were hired from film rental companies. Only about 8 of George's 20-odd films were available. And we used to watch Let George Do It over and over again. I remember the second time we hired Let George Do It, some idiot had cut out Grandad's flannelette nightshirt. And Bill Logan went berserk. And turned out that somebody had cut it out, you know, for their own private collection. But eventually, Bill Logan went personally to this company, Contemporary Films, that was it, in London, and he got them to screen another copy of Let George Do It. So the following meeting, we had Let George Do It again, and Grandad's nightshirt was in.
Wow. Did you ever think about asking Peter Pollard for that extra bit? Because I know, no doubt he probably put it out for himself.
Was it him? Yeah. They call him Scissors Pollard, you know.
They do.
Oh, yeah.
And light fingers, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But Bill Logan, great man.
Wow, that's a really interesting, you know, some really interesting insight there, John. Because for new members, we can see the names, but we don't know what
I know.
people are like. And, you know, like you said, he started the society and supported it for all those years.
He was a businessman. He had a garage. He owned a motor company called the Citadel Motor Company in Carlisle. And he was quite a wealthy man, but he took no prisoners, smoked cigars, didn't drink at all, but he always smoked cigars. And I'm sure most of you have seen photographs of him. There's a photograph of him actually in this current issue of the Vellum. There's a photograph of about 10 people in a group. And Tony Thornton's asking to name them. Well, he's sitting on the front row on the left, Bill Logan. Great man, great president.
Can you, John, can you just go through some of the other presidents? Because another member asked the question, can you briefly describe the past presidents of the society? You know, if there's anyone or any particular instance where you remember a president or two.
Would you put it in writing that you'll pay the libel fees for?
No, I know who sent me that question, so I'll send it in.
Oh, right. Well, there's nothing nasty to say. I would say we've had 8 presidents. I'll read the list. The first one was Bill Logan. Then there was Monty Montgomery, a man named E.G. Montgomery, who alas suffered from poor health and was only the president for a year. But he treated the conventions as though he was General Montgomery himself. I'm sure he arrived at the Imperial in a tank wearing a beret and all that sort of business. But he was a dapper little man, but he only lasted a year. Then there was Ray Bernard, a legend. I remember Jerry Maudsley once said that meeting Ray Bernard was rather like being introduced to God. he was a personal friend of mine, was Ray, and we lived only about 5 or 6 miles from each other. And he was a good president. He sometimes got in trouble by getting people's backs up over copyright of songs, etc. when we tried to issue songs. But overall, he was okay. Great man and a superb ukulele player. And then we had Dennis O'Connell. I'm sure some of you remember the name. He was a great man, the 4th president, and he was a brilliant pianist. He made his own feature films with an amateur drama group where he lived. And we showed one once, and he was very professional. And he was a very fit man. He used to do his exercises before when he came up to sing a song, he used to do some press-ups before he started singing. He was a character, I tell you, but a lovely man. And then Bernard Young was the next president. He was elected in 1983. He was okay. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. He died in South Africa.
Okay, I'm sorry, guys. Can you just make sure you're muted, please?
Bernard Young was friendly with one of George's sisters and used to visit them when they lived in Warrington. And he was all right, was Bernard. Went on a bit when he made a speech. It didn't last 5 minutes. It lasted about 2 hours, you know, but he was okay, and he knew a lot about George. So he was a good president. And then John Crofts, still with us, retired school teacher. He was president for 3 years, I think. And he was okay as president. He sold, he still does, I think. He's called the ukulele man. He sells ukuleles now. And he was okay. He was okay. Now we're coming to the God, in my opinion. The next president, of course, was our Dennis Taylor. I could spend all day talking about Dennis. He was an absolute treasure, he really was. Not only was he president for nearly 15 years, but he was a gentleman. But again, he was very firm. He looked after the shop, sorted the shop out. He produced the first professionally printed vellum. He had his fingers in many pies, but he was darn good at what he did. And a brilliant performer as well. Absolutely brilliant. But I remember him because he was such a nice man. And sometimes being nice and being in authority don't always go together. But he could do it, and he was good. Very good. He's a legend, is Dennis Taylor. Lovely man. Lovely man. And finally, our present president, Jerry Maudsley. Well, look at the hard work he's done. How much work went into getting that statue at Warrington? How much work went into getting the Royal Albert Hall sorted out? You know, people have a go at him sometimes, but he's worked very, very hard for the society. And whoever takes over from Jerry, well, you've got a job on, I'll tell you, because being president, I'm sorry to say, you have to be a bit of a bastard as well as, you know, you have to put your thumb down, you have to put your finger down and know what to do and get rid of the people who are trying. You've got to be a bit of a barrel.
Okay. Could you just, John, I have to ask, can you stop swearing? Because I find it highly offensive.
Right.
Some people in this room are complaining about your vulgarity.
I agree. I agree. I shall not mention that word again.
Okay, but you know, John, it's like what Jerry said to you about getting a phone call, like from God, and I'm sure when I first started, for me, when I started going to Castleford with Tom Fletcher and Daz, Dennis Taylor was there, and he phoned me up a few times about different things about ukuleles, and it was just the same. It was getting a phone call from God. And I wondered, what have I done to upset the JHS? I'm going to go and get kicked out.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you met any of the Formby film stars, John?
The film stars?
Yeah, the co-stars.
Oh, only one. That was Jimmy Clitheroe, who was in Much Too Shy. He played George's younger brother in Much Too Shy. And I believe other members of the society have met some of his leading ladies, but I personally have not. The only one I say is Jimmy Clitheroe. He came to he was a friend of John Guy, another legendary member of the society. And we came to one meeting and we screened Much Too Shy for him. But he was a very quiet man, very pale-faced, small, of course, but he was really a midget, I suppose, which is not offensive now, but he was that way. And very, very, very quiet. You had to coax. He did tell us a few stories about George in the film, and he also, of course, appeared in George's last summer show at the Queen's Theatre, Time of Your Life. He was in that, and he was very friendly with George because they were both simple northern people, and he told us some interesting stories, but you had to coax it out of him. He was very monosyllabic. He'd say a few words and then shut up, and you'd have to coax him to say more. But he was all right. Thrilled to meet him anyway.
So it was a bit like Peter Pollard.
Oh, definitely.
Coax him to talk.
Yes.
You know, John, we're just gone halfway through this, and I am amazed the stories you've got. It's certainly enlightened me. One of our members, Tom Stratford, asked me a question. I don't know if you can help me out on this. He wanted to know, did George Formby ever receive a motorbike from one of the manufacturers, for example, BSA or Norton or Triumph?
Yes, he did. Yes, he appeared. Excuse me. He appeared in a radio program called Workers' Playtime, I think, at their factory, and unknown to George, they presented him with a Norton motorbike at the end, a very powerful machine. I think the registration was UV111 or something, UVH111. And there's a photograph, I think it's in the archives, of George sitting on this motorbike. And George, as you know, was fond of motorbikes, very much so. But what happened was George took it home and he sold the thing 12 months later for 225 quid.
Really? £225 must have been a fortune.
It was. It was. We're talking about what, 1946, something like that. It was a lot of money. Yeah. But he sold it. So yes, he did receive a motorbike from the Norton factory.
Okay. One of our members sent a question in, and I thought about this myself because it's a really interesting question. And it is, which past member of the GFS would you like to have dinner and why?
Oh, good heavens. Well, the true answer is the lot of them. But I've got to choose one. I'd toss a coin between Pat Howson and Eddie Latter, believe it or not.
Okay.
But what was the question? The member?
Yeah, but I mean, why would you choose?
The member. Well, I can't choose Pat Howson because I'd be cheating, because she wasn't a member. She was just a guest at a couple of meetings. But Eddie Latter was an honorary member. So I can talk about him. I'd like to meet him. I'd like to have dinner with him or a long conversation with him. I'd like to ask him a lot of questions about the songs. You all know the songs that he wrote for George, but how did he get on with Beryl, for example?
Mm.
I can see him now. Eddie was a little man with a roundish face, and he came to several meetings of the society, but he spent most of the time in the bar. By reception, you used to walk down and there's the bar. And I can see him now sitting in the corner with his glass of whiskey and his cheeks red with the glow of the whiskey. And I became quite friendly with him. And I've got several letters here in my study from Eddie, but I wanted him to write an essay, a sort of article, come essay, come composition for the magazine. And he wouldn't do it until I bought him a whiskey. And after several whiskies later, he did agree, but no article appeared until out of the blue came a letter saying, "Here it is, John. Hope it will do. Love, Eddie." And there was this article, and we printed it in the vellum. It was called George and I. And they used to go out together, you know, they used to go to races and race meetings, and they used to have stories about horses. Apparently, George would only put 25p, which is 5 bob, on a horse, even though Eddie said that he mostly won. But he wouldn't put any more money on because he wasn't very good at getting his hand down, George, as you perhaps know.
Crikey.
Yeah, I think it'd be Eddie Latter, yeah. Although I could choose a dozen, but he was perhaps because of his songwriting skills, you know, because he wrote for George, for Tessie O'Shea, for Rob Wilton, and he'd have a host of stories.
An old Scouser.
An old Scouser, yes, he lived in Calderstones. Is there a place?
He was a funeral director, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He buried George. His real name was Bruce Williams. He was an undertaker, and. Well, there you are.
So he was an undertaker and he wrote songs?
Yes, he was an undertaker.
Oh, wow.
He wrote songs. He wrote songs for George and he buried George.
That's a bit bizarre, isn't it? I never would have thought that. I did not realise that.
It is bizarre. Bruce Williams, yes.
Our next question is something about ukuleles. Okay. And the first part of the question is, how did you become the owner of George Formby's, well, I think it's his most famous uke, the Windows uke, the wooden uke. He played Windows.
I suppose his most famous ukes would be the Abbott and the Ludwig. He recorded When I'm Cleaning Windows for Eagles Honophone with the Abbott. But in the film, as some of you may know, he used this. I've got it here because I knew there'd be a question on it. He used this ukulele in the film to sing When I'm Cleaning Windows, and it's still going. It's a job that just suits me. A window cleaner you would be if you could see what I can see when I'm cleaning windows. So that's George's window cleaning. And I didn't actually buy it first. It was bought by an actor named G. McKnight. For, you won't believe this, for £7.10 at the sale. And 6 months later, he obviously bought it as an investment because he advertised it in the Stage magazine for sale, George Formby instrument, receipt from sale, etc., £20. So I wrote off to him, and to my terrific excitement, he wrote back saying mine was the first letter he'd opened of the dozens he'd received, and if I wanted it, I could have it. So I did. But I did not know that George had recorded that George had sang When I'm Cleaning Windows with it until 1968. And then a group of us were invited by ABC Television to go over to the Didsbury studios in Manchester, where they were preparing a documentary on George called Looking Back at George Formby. And Marjorie Baker, the producers, took us into this little room, anteroom, and said, we've got some extracts here we're going to use in the programme. Do you think they're suitable? And she started playing a wartime newsreel. And then onto the screen came George playing my ukulele I'd got, singing When I'm Cleaning Windows. I couldn't believe it. And from then on, the price went up. I did take it about 15 years ago. Jill and I took it to the Antiques Roadshow when it came to Trentham near Stoke, and it was valued at between £8,000 and £18,000 by Paul Atterbury. But that's another story.
Crikey. What's your other uke collections like? What's your favourite banjo uke, John, if you've got one?
Without any doubt, the pre-war Abbott.
Really, yeah.
The one
you've got a Ludwig as well.
Yes, I've got Ludwigs, Gibsons, and a pre-war Abbott. Yes, but a lovely uke. If I could only have one other uke other than an Abbott, I think it'd be a baby Gibson, a UB2. Really, yeah. They're lovely, absolutely gorgeous. They're light. You can tune them to any key, and they're lovely. But I've got 10 ukes, and my second favourite's always been a baby Gibson. Yeah.
I don't know how you can have so many ukes, John. You can only play one at a time.
I know, but I've 10 fingers, so I play one with each finger, you see.
Is it true that you also own, you're one of the few people to own a Ludwig crown and a Markendale crown? I
don't know if I'm the only one, but I do, yes.
No, okay. And there's only 2 other people. I mean, that's amazing itself.
Really?
Do you practice a lot, John, with the
No, I don't. No, I don't. I should do, but I don't. I used to when I was younger and fitter, but now I fall asleep in the chair now instead of doing it.
Well, to be honest, John, I have been nattering Peter Parr to do practicing his uke playing, but he just never does.
No. Not right. He wouldn't improve anyway.
No.
Let's get at Peter then.
Okay, so going back onto our questions, why do you think George's music and films are still popular today? Because we're still here talking about George Formby. We're still looking, at the movies, his split stroke, his ukuleles, his, like last night we saw clips of him playing on stage with the Zoomers.
Yeah. Why do I think he's still popular today?
Yeah.
Well, one of my other heroes is, I thought this question would come up. One of my other heroes is Fred Astaire. Now, picture Fred Astaire with what picture comes into your mind? Top hat, white tie, tails, cane with a gold top, and patent shiny dancing shoes. Wonderful, wonderful vision, wonderful image. Put him in a boiler suit, and the image would be destroyed. The dancing would still be good. Yeah. What I'm getting at is the reason George was so popular and still is it's like a jigsaw. You've got one piece with his personality, another piece with the warmth, another piece with his fairly prominent teeth, another piece of jigsaw with his high-pitched voice, and then a final piece of the uke, because the uke is high-pitched, a bit tinny, some of them are anyway. So you put all these things together and you get this image of George Formby. That's why it's impossible for there ever to be another George Formby, because there'd always be pieces of the jigsaw missing. So that's the reason. I think he's a one-off. He's unique, and of course he was a simple man, but tremendously talented. But he never sort of boasted about it, and yet all these pieces of the jigsaw fitted together to make this wonderful, wonderful picture of simplicity. But what simplicity it was great. It's great.
Yeah, it's true that. Excuse me, one member sent me a question in, John. What things that the society did in the past would you like to see now?
Well, some of those, yeah. Oh, things I'd like to see. Some of those, that question was partly answered last night. For me, one of the highlights of last night was seeing George from little clips from his old television shows. How often do we see those at Blackpool? We meet, we have a concert, we have tea, we have a concert, we have a drink, we have a concert, we show a film, etc. But how often do we actually show little bits of George on the telly? I mean, he appeared 13 times, believe it or not, on telly, only 13 times during the 50s and, of course, the Friday show. And only 4 of them survived. Only 4 of his shows survived. And 2 of those are only little bits of it. But we could get together a half-hour thing. Well, it's somebody else has got to do the hard work, of course. But what do I miss? In the very early days, we used to have somebody to talk about George. It's a different world today, though. We can't ask somebody who appeared with George to come and talk to him because they're all dead. So, you know, in the early days, we could, and we did. Arthur Askey came. Well, he was the first one who talked about him. And we can't do it. But what I would love to see is a little more George, who I'm going to get in trouble here, and a little less Uke. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It does. That's very interesting insight, John.
Yeah.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
And, you know, how the Zoomers did that last night. I know.
I thought it was terrific.
Pepper, yeah, and Peter and Suzanne's here.
It was magic.
Yeah, it was really well put together because there was people playing in the thrash parts and there was clips, and it kept people interested. And especially when we were playing with the screen with George Formby playing on his back, and I thought it's amazing.
Yeah.
Cassie still couldn't work out the chords for some of the songs, even though she was looking at the tabs. But no, well done those Zoomers. Again, I think it was absolutely well put together and, you know, organised. And going on to you personally, John, have you got any regrets about your time in the society?
Regrets?
Yeah.
I think so. You don't go through life without having regrets. I remember having a terrible argument with Bernard Young one meeting, which, well, it wasn't very pleasant for him or for me, but we had an argument, and it was a year or 2 before I came back to the society, and him as well, I think. It was silly, really. Don't want to go into it, but regrets, yeah, of course I do. I wasn't very well during the 1970s. I had a stomach ulcer, which kept me away from several conventions. And when the weekend came and I wasn't feeling very well and I couldn't make it to Blackpool, I used to regret that I didn't, because I've attended every flipping convention for the last 40 years, I think. But I did miss some in the 70s, and that's what I regret. But I believe the society, well, I don't believe, I know the society had a rough time, a rough few years during the 1970s, early 80s. But we got over it because we're George Formby fans, and we always do.
Well done, yeah. Yes. We'll ask you another question from a prominent member of the GFS who asked, when you see George in his house, okay, he's often sometimes you see photographs of him on the, not on the piano, but with the piano.
Yeah.
Did he ever play the piano, or was it just?
I didn't believe he did. It was just a status symbol. It was just a status symbol. You see him plonking a piano during a publicity shot for Zip Goes a Million at the Palace Theatre. He didn't play the piano. Why should he? He couldn't read music anyway. But lots of good pianists don't read music. Who am I to say that he never played the piano? It's my opinion that he didn't.
No, it's interesting. I mean, you know, like you mentioned when you spoke to the Beatles, they never could read music very well, and they still wrote songs, you know, performed just like George. Okay. What would you say to any potential members about the society?
Potential members?
Yeah.
Go for it. You'll never regret it. If you're feeling a bit nervous about, you mean people who might want to join the society? Yeah. Well, go to a meeting at Blackpool when they resume, and you'll soon find out. It'll be a bit daunting for a few minutes, but somebody will find you out. Somebody will come up to you and take you by the arm and tell you what's going on, etc., and show you the program of events, and you'll make friends, and those friends will probably last a lifetime.
Yes,
they really will. So my advice to anybody who's thinking of joining the society is just to do it.
It's interesting because even now I've been in the society 15 years, John, a lot less than what you've been involved, and I can still remember going into the shoulder of mutton at Castleford and meeting Dennis Taylor, Laurie Torn, Lionel, and the other member who's on here now is Tom Fletcher.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they were the first 4 people I spoke to about the GFS and George Formby. So Tom's here now. Thank you, Tom, for encouraging me.
Yeah. The first 5 minutes, for any new member, the first 5 or 10 minutes at a convention are the most important. If you walk into that room and there's 200 people and nobody's looking at you and you're wondering what's going on and nobody bothers with you, that can have an effect on you. So the first 10 minutes, you've got to be made welcome. And,
yes, absolutely.
And, you know, as a teacher, the most important part of the lesson is the first 5 minutes when they're sizing you up.
Yeah.
Don't say that. Yeah, well, you've got to be, you do. It's that first 5 minutes to set the standard and, like say, meet people and put the message across and make people welcome. It's really good. I've got one more question that's just come through. I'm going to ask you, why do you think there's never been a feature film of George's life so far?
Why hasn't there been a feature film of Gracie Fields? Because they're northern.
Right.
If George Formby had been an American product, there'd have been several films of him, like there were about Al Jolson.
Right, okay.
But it wouldn't be box office. It would perhaps have been box office. I remember, didn't they do a film called The Tommy Steele Story? I think there's a feature film called...
Yes, Peterson, yes.
Yeah, The Tommy Steele Story. He'd only been on the scene for 4 or 5 years, but he made such an impression that somebody made a feature film of him. And he was also the subject of This Is Your Life, an early This Is Your Life program. But George Formby, just think about the story. His father, all the ups and downs of his father's career. George himself being born blind and all that business, and his marriage with Beryl and his wartime service. It's all there to make a superb feature film. But that's why there's been several documentaries on television about him, but no feature film. If a feature film was made of George Formby tomorrow, the cinemas would be they'd be mainly empty, I'm afraid. Shame. Should have been done years ago. But the reason is because he's northern and simple.
You don't think there's, there's some sort of hypocrisy with the instrument, what George is synonymous with, the ukulele, banjo, compared to...
Of course there is. That's right, of course, and the songs. and the flat cap and the stereotyped image. Ukulele banjo, my goodness. Who can make a film of somebody who plays that? Well, you could, you know, he was the master of it. It's a shame, really, that a film was not made. It would have been successful in the 30s and 40s, I think, but now it would die the death.
Okay. What is your favourite Formby song, and which Formby song do you enjoy playing most, John?
Leaning on a lamppost,
Yeah.
for obvious reasons. That's the complete answer to your question. My favourite film is It's in the Air, because it's the funniest film. Not his best, but certainly the funniest. And his best film from a production point of view is Let George Do It.
Let George do it.
But we all have our favourites. You've asked for my opinion. That's just my opinion. But from a cast point of view and a story point of view, Let George Do It. From a slapstick point of view, It's in the Air, because there's pieces of slapstick all the way through it, not just at the end, all the way through it.
Yeah, that's just been recently on TV as well. This last week, It's in the Air.
Has it?
I think so. Yeah.
There was one
Yeah,
on last week on Talking Pictures.
Spare a copper.
Spare a Copper.
Spare a Copper. Sorry, yes, Spare a Copper.
No, It's in the Air. It's in the Air hasn't been on for a while. No.
Okay. Right. I think that concludes our.
Is that it?
Not yet. I'm not finished off yet. I'm not finished off yet. It's been. I am aghast with the stories you've come out with, John. I've been really impressed.
I do apologise for the BASTAR word. If that's offended anyone, I do apologise, but it was the only word I could think of to answer that question.
Yeah, well, it will have to be reported to committee.
Right.
I want to say on behalf of everyone here, thank you for giving up your time, and thank you for everyone coming on to Zoom and the people who sent the questions in, and thank you to Peter and Lewis with the technical backup on this one.
Who's going to be the next victim?
Well, our next
Is that a
audience
secret?
Zoom meeting will be at the end of April, and we will be interviewing Lewis Clifton and Stuart Lowther. Okay, so we can compare two younger members.
Yes.
And you with a vast wealth of experience and adventures in GFS.
Well, when I first joined the society, I was about their age when they joined.
Really?
Interesting, yes.
Wow, that's amazing. And can I ask, you are in your 60s?
I'm 78.
70s, right, okay. Wow. All this time listening, playing George Formby.
Yeah. Must be.
Okay. So, again, thank you very much for has everyone enjoyed our meeting?
Yes,
Yeah. Is it worth doing again?
very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm
We'll
looking forward
mute
to our
to
next
clap him.
meeting.
Can we
Sorry?
unmute? Clap him.
No, not yet. No, you need to mute yourself. We're not having Pollard trying to take over. So again, thank you, John, and thank you for everyone who's taken part, who's come on the Zoom. It's really been beneficial, and it's been, for me, again, it's another example, like last night, how everyone's come together as a fan of Formby. So thank you again. And now you can all mute yourselves, except for Peter Pollard.
Now, Jeff.
Thank you, John.
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 John, lovely. Interesting.
Now there's all sorts of remedies that you can find, no matter what ailment you've got. But I've got a special one that you want to try, well, you'll find it's the best of the lot. It's the anti-maggie's homemade remedy, it's guaranteed never to fail. Now that's the stuff that will do the trick, it's sold at every chemist for one a decade. Got a leg of rheumatics or gout, or a pain in your property They had 1 and 2 and they were in the mess. But it's alright, said the vicar rather cursed. I've been and had a quiz and I found out what it is by his granddad's flat election. Lordy, lordy, my granddad's flat election. Oh, give me my shovel and the pin. I'm going down the road to get the coal. With my shovel and the pin and up a little bit of wind. I'm going down the old pole. Down the road for the gold. I'm going down the road to get the gold. With my meat and bread and candle in the hand. I'm going down the old pole.
Hey, she's coming down the street. Now ask him very confidentially, ain't she sweet? Ain't she nice? Look her over once or twice. Now ask him very confidentially, ain't she nice? Just pass the line in her direction, or be on mine. Ain't she perfection? Oh, I really don't you think she's kind of neat? Now ask him very confidentially, ain't she sweet?
Days need through your life too, and I know you've done your best. Tomorrow morning your daily jokes will do, so make the most of your night's rest. Good night, little fella, good night. It's time to close your eyes and go to sleep. A bedtime story, though I could tell, you might be thinking by and by, soon to sing the lullaby someday. You'll go your way, it may not be an easy fight, so don't give in, make up your mind to win. Good night, little fella.